Welcome to the Wrestling with God podcast, a podcast from Harmony Hill Baptist Church. This is a podcast dealing with apologetical issues, largely some information that I couldn't just quite squeeze into my sermons during the last series, and wanting to use this venue to sort of give some of that information to those who were interested. And so maybe you're watching because you have questions, or maybe you're watching because those in your world have questions. And so I hope this can be a help to you. In today's episode, I want to talk about alleged Bible contradictions. A lot of times those who are skeptical of Christianity have heard or make the statement that isn't the Bible full of errors, or isn't the Bible full of contradictions? And so a lot of Christians don't know how to respond to that question. And so I want to take just a few moments to walk through that. I think there's a couple things to notice here. One is that there is a difference between the term error, contradiction, and differences. Those are sort of different things. So an error is something that is just outright wrong, or there is an issue with it. This would be something like the vast majority of those things that are called errors in Scripture are actually transmission of copy errors. And so what that means is they might say there's over 1,000 errors in the Bible. What they're saying is that there are a number of times where someone's name was left out, or they used one word for love in this copy, agape maybe, and they used phileo, another Greek word for love, in another copy, and they're saying that's a contradiction, that's an error, when really it's just someone writing it down from one to the other. And I want you to know that the vast majority of alleged contradictions or errors are simply copyist errors. And so, yes, there are some times where there's a word transposed, or maybe it said 10,000 in one copy and it said 1,000 in another copy because 10 wasn't carried over. That is just copyist. But again, the idea of inerrancy is to the original autographs, or the original moment that Peter or John or Moses put pen to parchment. And so those copyists we can live with. But understand this, zero of those alleged errors in copying have anything to do with major doctrine or cause any sort of issue to the Christian faith. That's important to know. Now, the second term there is contradiction. And I would dare to say that a lot of what is referred to as a contradiction is maybe a difference. I heard one guy explain it this way on a YouTube video for Apologetics. He said this, that a contradiction is like what happened after the Titanic sunk. There were people who said that the Titanic broke in half and sunk, and then there were others who were on the boat that said, no, the whole thing tipped over in one motion without breaking and sunk. That is a contradiction. Both saying they were eyewitnesses, but those are different sets of facts. Both cannot be true. Now, so what's the difference between contradiction and a difference? Well, this same gentleman on the podcast I watched, it was a podcast called The 1 Minute Apologist, and he said this: a difference is if I were to come home and my wife were to say, hey, you're not going to believe this. An hour ago, a guy showed up from Publishers Clearinghouse with a big check, and we won a whole bunch of money. And then a little while later, I hear my wife on the phone with her mom and saying, you're not going to believe this. A couple of hours ago, 2 guys showed up, one with a big check to give me for Publishers Clearinghouse, and another guy was there to film it. See, that's not a contradiction. It's just one has more information. It's a difference of the level of information. So let me give you an example from Scripture. A common alleged contradiction that people will throw out is that the Gospels have, at the resurrection of Jesus, one of the Gospels will share that there was one angel at the tomb, and another Gospel will share that there were 2 angels at the tomb. And so a skeptic and a critic of the Bible will say, see, that's a contradiction. You can't trust any of them. It's not true. But what the example I just gave earlier about the Publishers Clearinghouse is someone accurately, without deceit, telling what they saw in both situations, one giving more detail than the other. And so for Matthew, he describes for his purposes that there was one angel there, and for Luke, he describes that there were two angels. That, to me, that is a difference. It's like if I were to go into a room and bring out a chair, and someone would say, "Hey, where did you get that chair?" And I said, "Yeah, I got the chair out of that room." And then someone else comes in and they bring a chair out, and someone says, "Well, I thought there was only one chair in there." "No, there's 10 chairs in there." Well, see, I only brought one chair out, but I wasn't being deceitful that there were more chairs in there. For my purposes, to answer the question in front of me, I got the chair from that room. It's not to exclude other chairs, and someone else just gave more information. Another example that people will often use is when Jesus is being crucified on the cross. Each of the four Gospels list the sign that hung above Jesus. Here is Jesus, King of the Jews, or King of the Jews, or this is Jesus, King of the Jews. And so they don't line up exactly. And so some will say, "See, you can't trust the Bible." Well, there's a couple of things to look at that. What if the actual phrase was a fuller statement that each of the Gospels are summarizing a smaller piece of? Or the Bible does say that it was written in 3 different languages. What if one was translating from one language, one was translating from another language, etc.? See, I don't see it as a contradiction, but different levels of information. That's important. The second thing about these alleged Bible contradictions is the fact that, for instance, when Jesus is described as teaching in one gospel, he might say a story and leave out a detail that's included in another gospel when he's telling a parable, for instance. Well, the assumption is that he only told that parable one time and that they did not somebody did not capture it exactly. Well, that's a bad assumption, because Jesus likely shared similar stories, similar sermons wherever he would travel and go. And it is possible that he did things more than one time. Let me give you an illustration. For instance, most of us are aware that Jesus fed 5,000 people with a few few loaves of bread and a few fish. But those who have studied the Bible know that he did that, and there was another occasion where he fed 4,000 people with a different number of fish and bread. So you could say, well, that's weird. I didn't realize that he did the same feeding miracle 2 times. But in Matthew chapter 16, Jesus, talking to the disciples, tells them, "Do you not remember when I fed the 5,000 and how many baskets were left over?" And then he says, "And do you also not remember when I fed 4,000 and how many baskets were left over?" And so sometimes it could be that Matthew is recording a parable taught by Jesus that was spoken in one region, and Luke from another time that he taught it. And so there are some slight differences. The third thing that I would say about these alleged Bible contradictions is that sometimes we are tempted to overlay our view of how literature should operate on Old Testament or New Testament styles of writing. What I mean is this. For the Western world, we highly value chronology and sequence of events in our storytelling. And so sometimes we will overlay that standard over the New Testament writers. What you have to understand is that all ancient writers operated with different rules than we operate under. So for instance, in the New Testament, with the gospel writers, it was perfectly acceptable, and you see this in other writings outside of the Bible, for a writer to be accurately considered credible and accurate, to tell a story with a different compressed sequence of events, or the time frame is seemingly compressed. For instance, Mark writes, "It is a whirlwind." When you read the book of Mark, it is immediately this, and then at once this, and immediately this happened, where in some of the others, it's a different sort of flow and time, and it's not as rapid paced. Both were within the rules of their writing. The second thing is that though we value sequence and chronology to be factual and that's credible, for the New Testament writers, it was acceptable practice to rearrange a sequence of events for the purpose of the writing of the author. So, for instance, in the New Testament, when Jesus is tempted in the wilderness, one of the gospel writers might list it ABC, and another gospel writer might mention it as ACB. And people will say, well, which is it? It's not accurate. They can't get their story straight. But they're applying a rule of a modern way of writing to those that had different rules for writing. It was acceptable, didn't harm their credibility if they had a purpose for rearranging the sequence of events. Look, there are a lot of things that we could talk about, and we could spend another hour talking about alleged Bible contradictions. I want to drop some resources into the show notes if you would like to do further reading on this subject. But what I want to leave you with is this. Just because there is something that is maybe confounding or you're wrestling with, is it a contradiction? Is it a difference? Is it a copyist error? At the end of the day, what I would encourage you to do is not throw the baby out with the bathwater, as they say, which is to say, because I don't understand this one thing, I'm not able to believe the rest. In the sermon that I preached in this series about how the Bible is trustworthy, I laid out reasons why the Bible is historically accurate and reliable, and the message therein is reliable. And so just because we disagree or have a question about one point, don't walk away from the clear teaching. I believe it was Mark Twain, and I'm going to paraphrase this, that said something to the effect of, I don't have a problem with the things in the Bible I don't understand. It's the things I do understand that I have a problem with. And I think that is a good caution in that we need to wrestle more with the things that are clear and just understand that there is logic and reason, and God has miraculously put His Scripture together, infallible, inerrant, for our good, for everything we need to know, for right conduct and relationship with Him. So with that, thank you so much for watching this episode of the Wrestling with God podcast. Please like, share, subscribe, help us beat the algorithm, get this out to as many as possible. And if you choose to share this with someone, I would really ask that you share it and then have a conversation with them. These types of things are better in dialogue rather than just watching a video. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you the next time you're on the hill.